Morning, everybody. Afternoon, good evening. Since we're around the world with this stuff, we better keep in touch with everybody. I hope you all enjoyed my episode yesterday on jazz, World War II, Sidney Bechet, and the European experience of the jazz lover. And thank you to all my European followers. You guys have been really enlightening for me. I didn't realize there's such a passionate base over there. You guys know your stuff. You've seen a lot of the greats. America should take a cue from you guys. You guys know this music, this art, this passion. And so my hat's off to you guys, absolutely. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite guys, Wynton Kelly. And I'm probably going to say it about most of the guys I do bios on, but I love Wynton. I love his elegant, graceful stride. He just plays with such a smooth, mellow character. Always finds pocket. Always finds a nice pattern where he feels he can complement the band. He never needs to take over and be the spotlight. You know, even in a trio setting, he's going to still play well within the constraints of the rhythm. And that's essential for rhythm and blues, any blues-based player, even hard bop and a lot of the stuff he does side work on. His grooving sense was what attracted a lot of people to him, including Miles Davis. Miles Davis would sometimes get off stage and watch him because he would just hold the band together. But we're going to back up a little bit here. December 2nd, 1931. So pretty much the beginning of the Depression. He's born. His childhood years are obviously going through some great poverty. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, son of Jamaican immigrants. And New York, of course, has immigrants from the entire world. His local area, he jammed with the Abrams brothers, who I'm not super familiar with, but he also jammed with Ahmad Abdul Malik, Ernie Henry, and Cecil Payne. Those are guys from his neighborhood in New York. And New York doesn't have quite the litany of great players that Philly or Chicago does for some reason, but New York does have some great players, including Monk Rollins, Wynton Kelly. I think a lot of where his stride comes from is he played in R&B groups as a young guy in the 50s. 48, 49, 50. He plays with Hot Lips Page in 48. He plays with Eddie Cleanhead Vincent in 49. And he plays with Eddie Lockjaw Davis in 50. So apparently you had to have a really cool nickname for Wynton Kelly to play with you. Hot Lips, Cleanhead, Lockjaw. Not bad. In Blue Note in 1951, before the LP era, they bring Wynton Kelly in, and he does this great session. It was, of course, initially a 10-inch, and this is a Japanese issue of it on a 12-inch format. I think they must have added some songs to it because they have like 10 songs on each side. One's from 51. The side 2 was recorded August 1st, 51. So they're from similar sessions. There's a couple double takes here. So maybe it is all just from that 10-inch, just with some alternate takes. But his stride, his groove, his movement, his feel is already quite evident here in 51 when he's doing this stuff. And that's pretty early for Blue Note in terms of modern jazz. People compare him to Bud Powell to some degree. Others have said he's got some of the joy and expression of a Teddy Wilson, who helped a lot of those great Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton bands just cook. In 51, he joins Dinah Washington, and he actually comes back to her a few times. He plays with Lester Young, he plays with Dizzy Gillespie off and on in the 50s. In 52, he was drafted by the Army, and it pretty much puts his jazz career on hold, which I think is hard for us to understand, but it happened to Elvis too, so I guess it's not unprecedented by any means. But when in the Army, it actually became a kind of a proving ground for him. He ends up joining the 3rd Army Traveling Show. He recruits Duke Pearson to join the group of Blue Note fame, one of the great players of Blue Note on piano. They were the only 2 brothers in a group of 24 guys. And so they set about adding more African Americans to their crew, and eventually it became a much more swinging unit. And he retires from the Army being Private First Class Wynton Kelly as director of the show, the traveling music group for the 3rd Army. It's pretty impressive. After the Army, He tours again with Dizzy. He joins Mingus for a West Coast tour. Never stays too long. And then in 1956, he's part of a landmark recording. And on this great Billie Holiday record, Lady Sings the Blues, this is the first recording of it. The band here is just outstanding. Lenny McBrown's playing the drums. Paul Kineshay's on alto. Charlie Shavers is playing the trumpet. Tony Scott's in the group. Kenny Burrell's playing guitar. Wynton Kelly's on the piano. That's outstanding stuff. And some of those guys you don't necessarily associate with Verve and Clef, but nevertheless, they recorded this stuff in 54, 55, 56 in there. And it was one of the last recordings on Clef before Clef got consolidated into the new Verve imprint. You need to watch my episode on Verve to know more about that. It's just an outstanding song. Wynton is given a lot of room here to just gently lilt the group along. And I think Charlie Shavers, for me, is one of the great underappreciated guys in jazz. His tone is bright, full of life and love, like an Armstrong. He just never quite got the fame that carried him over into the modern day jazz buyer. But I recommend Charlie Shavers to anybody and everybody. He's a guy that you're going to love. His Bethlehem recordings from the mid-50s are fantastic. Some of his later stuff is a little more commercial, but he's just one of those great icons that people know nothing about. Kinneshay also had a kind of a short, brief career, but he's a really wonderful player, plays like Lester Young. This is some Billie Holiday that everybody should seek out without any question about it. She is a part of some Dinah Washington sessions. This is 36011, and it's a great group on here. And this is almost certainly recorded before the LP era. Barry Galbraith, Clark Terry, Jimmy Cleveland, Ketter Betts, Wynton Kelly, Cecil Payne, and Paul Kinneshay. What a group. Dinah records in the early 50s. He's a part of her touring group for a number of years, off and on. But again, the group on this is just outstanding. Emercy is probably the most slept on label from the late 50s. People know the Blue Note, people know the Prestige, Riverside. Emercy is quietly in Chicago releasing amazing stuff with Sarah Vaughan, Clifford Brown, Dinah Washington. There's just some serious jazz being made. And the sidemen on these records is top notch. It's not like some obscure label. Even Argo's sidemen at this point are fairly obscure people. Here, the entire band, Galbraith, Terry, Cleveland, Kelly, Payne, Kinneshay, it's all pretty big name guys. People need to dig Emercy records. They're not that expensive. They're super high quality. This one's from 36065. So this one might actually be from 55. Dinah Washington, Georgie Auld, Herb Geller, Ketter Betts, Wynton Kelly, and Jimmy Cobb. So him and Jimmy Cobb are playing together pretty early before the Miles groups. And they will play again in a great trio in the mid-60s. This is Newport 58, where he reprises his role with Dinah at that point. He's doing work with Sonny Chris, and I've played this record before. Outstanding West Coast post-bop, very modern. Chris is a gorgeous player, and Wynton is a great compliment to him. It says Joe Scott on the back, but my research said he was on part of that record. He's on a number of Dizzy Gillespie recordings at Verve in the mid to late 50s. Dizzy, of course, was a real trendsetter. And the modern day collector doesn't seem to appreciate Dizzy like they should. You know, he's Parker's co-patriot. They just really do some fantastic stuff together. And it's actually a great setting for young Wynton. Dizzy always knew about groove. You know, there's a reason why Dizzy was the guy who brought Manteca and the Cubano sound to America. Dizzy got it. Dizzy plays with some big bands. A lot of guys came and went through Gillespie's orchestra over the years. It was a great proving ground for any young player. He's on Rollins' first Blue Note from '56, another fantastic Hallmark record that every collector should look for. He also appears on Rollins' Nuke Time in probably '58. That's also a fantastic record. He shows up in '57 on the RCA subsidiary Vic with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. This doesn't give credit to him here. It says Sam Dockery. There was an initial version of this, or a different version anyway, called Theory of Art. I've not seen it. There's some alternate takes, and it's possible that Wynton was on the alternate takes, because they don't list him here. But my research definitely said he was part of that session. He's playing with Clark Terry in '57, Serenade to a Bus Seat. And I think him and Terry probably played together in Gillespie's band, if I recall. It's about this time where he gets his second record as a leader. This is called Wynton Kelly Piano. And this is an outstanding record on Riverside with Kenny Burrell, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. And Paul Chambers and him have a long working career together off and on, between Miles groups, his work, a later trio. Yeah, he definitely had a relationship and a kinship with Paul Chambers. And for my money, anything that Chambers and Kelly are on together is worth digging into. Johnny Griffin makes his debut at Blue Note in '56, introducing Johnny Griffin, Chicago great tenor player. And this has Wynton Kelly, Max Roach, and Curly Russell. So it's pretty much just Griffin with an incredible rhythm section. Roach, Russell, and Kelly. There's a lot of groove in those three guys. Should probably give a little sample of that. But here's the piano record, which is also called Whisper Not for some reason. But great record, great tempos. To play clean at tempo on any instrument requires dexterity and a great ear. You know, that foot needs to be tapping. You need to be really in your pocket. And if you slip out of the groove, it's going to sound ragged. You know, the great players can play at tempo without a hesitation. Here you can really feel a great groove rhythm section. The groove is just filling the room, and Griffin just has to float on top of it. That's easy for a tenor player to do. If you got a great rhythm section, doesn't matter if it's rhythm and blues, doesn't matter if it's rock and roll, doesn't matter if it's jazz, doesn't matter if it's the blues. If your piano, bass, and drums are laying down solid train tracks, it doesn't matter what the train cars do. It just doesn't. The tracks are what matters, the rhythm, the groove, the feel. And black music is all encapsulated 100% in that sexual, striding rhythm of the up and down of what we do in the bedroom. If you can't nod your head, tap your foot, chances are it ain't jazz. And I get in trouble with people sometimes because I will say that some of that later jazz stuff that people think is jazz, it ain't doing what jazz is supposed to do. So how can it be? It's a descendant of, it's got roots of jazz in it, but if jazz ain't making you have a good time and ain't making you tap your foot and want to have sex, it ain't jazz. It can't be. Another great Johnny Griffin section. This one's from '57, I believe. And here Hank Mobley joins him, and him and Mobley worked together quite a lot as well. Coltrane's also on the tenor. Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Art Blakey. Lee Morgan's on the trumpet. This is an outstanding record. Just a huge group on it. It really cooks. It's worth anybody's time to dig into that record. All those 1500 Blue Notes, though, from like 1530 through 1599, it's all fantastic. Kelly's second record is called Kelly Blue. It's a part sextet, part of it's a trio. Nat Adderley, Benny Golson, Bobby Jasper, the great flute players on it. Jimmy Cobb, Paul Chambers, again, you see that connection. Here they do a great version of Willow Wait For Me, and I'm just a huge fan of this song. It's got a great sorrowful expression of love denied, and ultimately that's pretty much what we're always talking about, is love being denied. Because in spite of our political environment, in spite of our economic plight, the day-to-day of eating, dancing, drinking, and sex, that's what's really on the foreground of our mind most of the time. And even though a jazz musician might be talking about his political situation, he might be referencing his economic situation, still somehow he's rather more focused on, I would like to get laid tonight. That would take my edge off. He plays on 3 of Abby Lincoln's records at Riverside in the late 50s. And Abby's, of course, an interesting gal. Her first record's kind of a bit schmaltzy on the Liberty label, but these 3 Riverside records are pretty serious records with great bands on them. Kenny Dorham, Sonny Rollins, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Max Roach, 1957. So you see that she's really playing with some giants. Riverside had a huge house roster of jazz guys in 57, 58, 59. And so if you came in and did a session there, chances are your sidemen were going to be of the absolute top notch. On one of the tracks, maybe 2 of the tracks on this record, that's him. The bass player, Paul Chambers, gets so drunk he passes out. And young Wynton Kelly, when he was first in school for music back in high school, wanted to learn piano, but they didn't have a piano for him to learn, so he learned music theory by playing bass. And so here he is in the studio in 1958 working with Abby Lincoln. Paul Chambers is passed out drunk. They can't wake him. And so they actually conscript Mr. Wynton Kelly to play bass. And so he actually plays bass on a couple tracks on this record. That's pretty interesting stuff. Not something that just any musician can do without question about it. This is another Johnny Griffin record that he ends up on. This one's a little bit later, probably 60, 61, 304, maybe 59. So this is going to lead us now to Wynton Kelly's time with Miles Davis. And he's playing as a sideman prolifically. And actually working with Miles Davis kind of allows him to continue that, because Miles Davis' work tended to be sporadic at this point. His touring, it was just kind of how Miles' star led him. And another incident that reveals Miles Davis' awful personality is how Wynton Kelly came to be in the Miles Davis Quintet. Red Garland was late for a show, and I don't know what precipitated this before, whether Wynton was missing a lot of shows. I mean, was Garland missing a lot of shows? Was alcohol a problem? Drugs a problem? I don't know. But I do know that Red Garland was late for a gig. When Kelly was there, he puts Kelly up on the stage. When Red Garland shows up, Miles turned to Red Garland and said, "The job is his now." That's how Miles handled people. He's just an asshole of the highest degree. The deeper I dig into jazz, the less I respect him as a person. I certainly respect the huge shadow he casts and how much of his fame brings people into jazz. He's absolutely an essential part of it, but it doesn't make him a good person. And he's really not. All that being said, Wynton Kelly steps into the band from 59 to about 63. and he's still doing stuff on his own and as a sideman elsewhere. And he develops quite a relationship with Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers at this point. But he's on Someday My Prince Will Come, which is truly one of my favorite jazz records. When you have Mobley, Coltrane, Kelly, Chambers, and Cobb, there's not a lot that you can say or do to make that not great. And with Miles, and in addition, it's just a great record from stem to stern. It's just a wonderful journey. Old Friends, Francing, Drag Dog, I Thought About You, the whole thing. I used to drive a lot of Lyft and Uber a couple years back between DJ gigs, and I could put that CD in and let it play for days. Kinda Blue, another example of Miles' personality and how he operated, was Miles decided he wanted to delve into the modal thing that was going on. And Miles didn't originate it. Let's not make no mistake about that. But Miles asked around who would be a good guy to hire that could really grasp and play modal playing. And Bill Evans was recommended to him, which leads Bill Evans to playing most of the tracks on this record, with the exception here being Freddie Freeloader, which is also a great song that Wynton gets to play on. But just to sideline one of your members to placate your own ego so you can be part of what's happening, it doesn't speak volumes about your character. Great band leader? Great band leaders don't insult their members by forcing them to sit aside for a session. And Kinda Blue, of course, ends up being its own judge, because it does become one of the greatest records of all time, one of the greatest selling jazz records of all time. It's a record that should be in every record collection, not just jazz. Any collection should have Kinda Blue. It's a perfect, wonderful, entertaining, light with enough substance to carry you. It's just the perfect record in so many ways. I do an episode on Kinda Blue probably about 100 episodes ago now, because I've been doing episodes daily. They're really piling up. He's also on these two Black Hawk Volume 1 and 2 records. Wynton Kelly is fantastic on that. That leads him to working in 59, 58 with Coltrane at Atlantic. He sits on Giant Steps. I don't think he's on all the record, but he's on a number of the tracks. And I think he's only on a few tracks on this one as well. But again, you make connections in jazz and you end up working with guys. In 59, he works with Cannonball Adderley, who he also met through Miles Davis. And this is Cannonball's last record for MRC Mercury. It's Adderley Quintet in Chicago. And if you listen to this group here, Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb. It's essentially Miles' group without him. Let's go rate this record. We'll bring the whole crew over here. Let's have some fun. And it's a fantastic record. I think it's a little underappreciated. He does a lot of stuff with Cannonball in the late 50s into the early mid 60s. Train, Adderley have a wonderful chemistry together. They really seem to dart and weave and complement each other. And you really get the feeling like Coltrane and Cannonball enjoy hearing each other, what each other has to say. Sometimes when you listen to a guy's playing, it's almost like, are you even listening to what he said? Are you going to compliment that, or are you just going to do your own thing? And some players just felt like when they came in, they were going to do what they were going to do, irregardless of what had happened before. And there's DJs that come to clubs with premeditated sets that don't take into any account who's in the bar right now, how many people are in the bar right now, what time of day it is. They don't care. They're going to play their premeditated set, and that's how egotistical they are and how inconsequential their audience is to them. And those DJs don't get work for very long. You have to read your room. As a jazz player, you got to feel your band and hear what the guys are saying. And I feel like Coltrane and Cannonball probably had a great rapport and probably joked around a lot. They just really feel to have a lovely chemistry, as does Kelly, Chambers, and Cobb. And I just really feel a joy in this record. And I think part of it is being free of the cloud of negativity that is Miles Davis. I mentioned he does quite a bit of stuff with Cannonball. I didn't pull them all out, but these are all on Riverside. Takes Charge, it's fantastic, with Julian, Cannonball, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Albert Heath, Percy Heath, recorded in '59. Cannonball Adderley with Milt Jackson, Things Are Getting Better. It's got Wynton, Percy Heath, Art Blakey. Cannonball Adderley Quintet Plus. It's got Nat, Sam Jones, Louis Hayes, Victor Feldman. Wynton Kelly is a guest artist on some tracks. This is African Waltz, Cannonball with his orchestra. And this has a pretty big group on it. Wynton Kelly's a part of that. He also, of course, works with Cannonball's brother, Nat Adderley. And Cannonball and Nat were never too far apart in the 50s. They recorded at Savoy simultaneously. They recorded at Emersey simultaneously. They recorded at Riverside simultaneously. They appeared on each other's records a lot. It's not till the mid-60s where Cannonball and Nat start going their own ways on different labels and start appearing less on each other's records. But this has Slide Hampton on it, Layman Jackson, Wynton Kelly, and Sam Jones. Slide Hampton sighting on Riverside. This one has Nat Adderley, Joe Zawinul, the great Austrian, Sam Jones, Louis Hayes. Side 2 has Adderley, Kelly, Chambers, and Joe, Philly Joe. This one, of course, has Heath, Yusuf Lateef, Charlie Rouse, and Wynton Kelly. Those are great records as well. And I want to remind people that when you're talking late 50s, Riverside, Blue Note, Prestige, you really can't go wrong. Benny Golson and him play together in Dizzy Gillespie's group, so he helps out Benny Golson on this Modern Touch of Benny Golson record on Riverside. It's a fantastic record. It took me a while to find, actually. It goes for pretty good money. Golson's one of the great players. Jazz Messenger alum. He played a lot with Art Farmer. Great album cover. Just relaxing in that modern 1960 vibe. You know, you get the feeling like Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant could walk into that apartment and have a cigarette, and we're gonna drink a cocktail and talk about Tiffany's. See what I'm saying? It's just that wonderful era. This is a great record on Contemporary from probably '58. Benny Golson, the New York Scene. I believe this was even recorded in New York, even though it is a contemporary record. Yeah, recorded in New York in the fall of '57, so it probably got released in '58. That leads Wynton in 1960, while he's working with Miles Davis, to sign a contract with Vee Jay Records. And it's actually while he goes to Chicago with Cannonball and the crew, Miles' group, that he ends up signing with Vee Jay, a fantastic label from the Chicago area. And he meets Wayne Shorter there, he meets Lee Morgan there. He does some stuff with Lee Morgan later on. He, of course, works a lot with Paul Chambers here as well. And Chambers also ends up signing with Vee Jay. And so Vee Jay makes a pretty big splash into jazz in '59 with guys like Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers and Lee Morgan and Wayne Shorter. And I think Shorter's, some of his best records are here at Vee Jay. And Vee Jay's jazz department isn't that long-lived. Especially these early 3000 series records, from 3002 through about 3025 is the core of the real great late 50s Vee Jay stuff. Once it moves into the 60s and the later 3030s, 3040s, it starts becoming more Eddie Harris and Eddie Higgins, and it's still good stuff, but it's a little bit more commercialized. Eddie Harris is doing a lot of show tunes, and it's good jazz, and he's a great player, but it's more rhythm and blues, more of a pop commercial edge. But this early Vee Jay stuff, it's outstanding. This has Lee Morgan, Philly Joe, Wayne Shorter, and Paul Chambers. So you're not really going to get a better group than that even on Blue Note. That's top of the mark. I love this record. It actually fetches pretty good money. This record can get up near $100 pretty easily for a nice old pressing of it. But when you got Morgan, Shorter, Philly, Kelly, and Chambers, that's what happens. You know, your sidemen do often have a large dictation in how much your records are going to go for. A mere 7 releases later is Wynton Kelly at Midnight. And if I recall, this is a trio session. And if I also recall, it's Japanese. It is. So it doesn't tell me. But I think it is a trio session, if I'm pretty sure. We'll give it a quick spin. Yeah. You can tell almost right away if it's a trio session. There's just a different space to it. A pianist, I feel, in a trio is really relaxed because it's his show. So he doesn't need to force all these notes in before the horns come back. I got this whole 7 minutes of this track to delicately and daintily express what's on my mind. And whether it's Monk in a trio setting or even as a solo player, I love Monk, or a guy like Wynton Kelly, Duke Pearson, trios are great showcases for piano players. It puts them in a relaxed setting where they can just take their time. And so often you can put on a trio record and not even know it's trio, but within a few bars you're like, oh, that piano seems like he doesn't have to worry about those horns coming in and demanding their space. And horn players demand space. You know, I mean, if you're playing with John Coltrane, your ability to get spotlight gets greatly diminished. And probably rightfully so. But truth be told, I find myself in a piano trio setting in the mood for myself more frequently than I do for just a loud horn ensemble, you know. And when you start talking like Oliver Nelson arrangements in the 60s, that type of large brass, it's so bright. You know, I can't play horns at a DJ gig like that. It's just gonna, the mood's gonna be fine, and then Gil Evans or Oliver Nelson's horns arrangements are gonna come in, and it's gonna swell and fill up the room, and it's gonna be so bright and so loud. And the thing about horns is that they cut through the same range as the human voice. Bass is below the human voice. Drums don't really detract from the human voice. And as a DJ, I've often learned the perfect way to fill a room with music is so that you can barely hear people's conversations over the music. You don't want to hear what they're saying, but you want to hear the audible buzz of voices. If you play too quietly, people are going to be talking like this. And when people talk like this, it doesn't create an electricity or an energy. But if the music's just loud enough in the bar, where everyone's got to talk with a full tone, and they're talking like this, it creates a buzz across the room, and it actually attracts people in. People subconsciously think that there's just an energy, and if you have that volume just right, you don't want to be too loud, but if that volume is just right, and people are talking that way, you can just hear the room buzzing. And talking like this, the music being too quiet, that's never good. If the music's just loud, and everyone's at a table just talking like this, and there's no energy from that. But if I got the volume here, and I'm at my table talking to my friend about what I saw last night on TV, and it was a great show, a great episode, and the table next to them, they're talking about the game last night, and the table over here is talking about, I hate my husband, he's such an ass. All those conversations create an energy and a buzz around the room, and it's something that took me kind of years to see it, you know. And that's the problem with some horns, is I can have my volume set just perfectly. The bass and the drums and the piano are just filling the room just perfectly. And all of a sudden, Oliver Nelson or Gil Evans or even any horn player for that matter will come in, and starts cutting through the voices, and suddenly no one can hear each other. And so I've learned to really appreciate piano trios. This is Someday My Prince Will Come. This is a Japanese pressing of this 3038. And this is Autumn Leaves, another Wynton Kelly record on Vee Jay 3022. And I think this one, 3022, is actually a different cover of that one. I think this is the original cover. I actually prefer that later cover more. But his stuff at Vee Jay is really outstanding. Like I mentioned, he works with Paul Chambers, and he ends up helping Chambers on his 2 Vee Jay records, Go and first baseman, which is a clever take on baseball. First baseman. And Chambers was the first baseman for a long time, for most sessions in the late 50s. He was the go-to guy. This record's outstanding, by the way. Freddie Hubbard has a really young guys on this. Jimmy Cobb, Philly Joe, Wynton Kelly, and Adderley. So again, you got that same Miles Davis crew. Adderley, Kelly, Jimmy Cobb, Philly Joe Jones is on some tracks, and then Freddie Hubbard takes the place of the trumpet player there, and there's no Coltrane, of course. But you can see how those guys had a niche. They were enjoying being with each other. Another guy that was important part of Wynton Kelly was Blue Mitchell, and he shows up again on a number of great Blue Mitchell records. This one is the Big Six, and it's just an outstanding record. I think I paid $40 for a sealed OJC of this, and that's crazy for OJC. And now it probably goes for $70, $80. I was just talking to my good friend Ken McAuliffe, and OJC records now are selling for $60, $70, $80 if they're in good shape. And these records sold for $4, $5, $6 when they were first issued. So it's crazy seeing that change. Out of the Blue is an outstanding record. Art Blakey, Benny Golson, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Sam Jones. Another fantastic Riverside. Probably 293, probably from 59. Blue Soul, probably Blue Mitchell's most famous record. The Sextet with Heath, Curtis Fuller, Philly Joe, and Wynton Kelly. Just a great record, great layout, great color choices. That's great graphic design by the Riverside graphic department. Not a great cover here, but Blues Moose, Blue Mitchell. So you see Wynton Kelly really becomes a favorite. A lot of these guys, Griffin, Adderley, Blue Mitchell, Hank Mobley. He shows that his side work is pretty immense. This is Hank Mobley's Peckin' Time, and he does a lot of Mobley's best records have Wynton Kelly. And Wynton Kelly is just such a great complementary piece. And of course, Mobley and Kelly play together with Miles for a stretch. And this is a couple records he does with King Curtis. And King Curtis is, of course, very much a rhythm and blues kind of early soul jazz crossover guy. And Kelly was the perfect foil for that as well. But it's interesting to watch how these guys, as they move through each other's crews, they find places to play with each other, and they continue working with each other. It's one of the wonderful things about jazz. And Wynton Kelly's discography is not huge. You have that Blue Note early, you have those couple 3 Riversides, you have those 4 Vee Jay records, and one of the things that really turned me on to Vee Jay was Wynton Kelly. And then he goes to Verve in the mid-50s with Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers, and they make some of the best jazz that Verve has to offer at this point. Verve is doing some pretty commercialized stuff. They've got Jimmy Smith doing big show tunes. They've got Kai Winding and just guys that are doing fairly commercialized jazz. And some of the most straightforward jazz happening at this point is with Wynton Kelly's group at Verve. But even here you have Klaus Ogerman adding strings on this, which I forgot was on there. Yeah, the string. I forgot the strings were on that one. And to me, that makes that a lesser Wynton Kelly record. This is a cooker right here. Smoking at the half note with Wes Montgomery. And him and Wes have a relationship off and on for a while too at this point. And this is a great record. And being that it's live, it keeps the Creed Taylors and the Oliver Nelsons, the Gary McFarlanes, the Klaus Ogermans away. You know, I mean, we can go play the jazz and the blues as we hear it, feel it, and see it, not placate our masters at Verve Records who want to sell records to the white suburban station wagon guys. And that's what a lot of Verve Records at this point had become. Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Wynton Kelly, Wes Montgomery. So again, that Jimmy Cobb, Paul Chambers, Wynton Kelly relationship lasts, I believe, in about 67 when Paul Chambers passes, if I'm not mistaken. '69 is when Chambers passes. So they play together for a long time. Here's two more fantastic Wynton Kelly records at Verve. And again, Verve Records, you're going to get production of a different level when you work with the guys at Verve Records. But when he leaves Miles in '63, Cobb and Chambers and Kelly all leave together. And I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that playing with Miles was taxing. It was exhausting. And it probably drained some of the fun out of this. He has a modest hit in '64. It was a modest hit on the R&B charts. Wasn't, of course, huge by any means. Wynton Kelly deserves more fame, more recognition. He's a part of the jazz canon for 1950 through '65. He shows up on so many great records. And I showed you a lot of his side work, but he's doing stuff with Jimmy Cleveland. He's doing stuff with Loris Alexandria. His list of side work is pages long, and I have most of it, being that's the era that I really know well, is his era. Sadly, he suffered from epilepsy, and he was a heavy drinker, and his life was cut short. He's in Toronto, my hometown, believe it or not, and he has an epileptic seizure and passes away. And we lost Wynton Kelly at a fairly young age. I think it was 1980, 79. I should have wrote the date down. But all that being said, I'm a huge Wynton Kelly fan. Just really love his work. I love his rhythmic groove and approach. I love his feel. I like his personality. You know, he's one of the guys that has a lot of joy in him. A lot of, he's not dwelling on the oppression. He's not being negative. He's trying to make the best of it. And from his work with Miles to his early stuff on Blue Note, to his stuff with Griffin, Mobley, Morgan, Blue Mitchell, to his later stuff with Cobb, Chambers, and Wes Montgomery, he's really a part of a major chunk of that era's jazz canon. And we all got to tip our hats to Wynton Kelly. I appreciate you all for watching. My name is Dan, I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Please share your questions, thoughts, and opinions. Check out my episode I did yesterday on Sidney Bechet, the World War II, and jazz in Europe. I think there's some interesting insight on that episode that people should watch. History is important. We have to have our context in history. And it's really interesting to see how much jazz is a part of our history. From World War I through to the present, jazz is a major player and a background to so much of what's happening in our world. When the troops go around the world in the Second World War, jazz is right there. From the South Pacific to the European theater to the European continent, all the way through Canada and America, jazz is omnipresent and was often speaking about the times that people lived in. And it requires understanding on our part to know history, to know people's situations, for us to have the empathy to hear it and feel it. So check out that episode if you haven't watched it. I appreciate you all. Subscribe to my channel. Tell your jazz friends about it. We try not to deal with pressings and speakers and all that stuff as much. We try to focus on the music, the artists, the personalities, and the history and the backdrop that this music was being made in. Because it's not made in a vacuum. It's made in the moment, and what's happening around it is influencing and impacting it and informing us. So we have to have a grasp of our history and the context that this music was made in to understand it. It's absolutely essential. If we don't grasp the oppression of the black man in America, we can't hear jazz. We just can't. And I meet a lot of white Americans who their only concept of blacks is they're criminals. They watch what's on the news, and all the news reports is negative, negative, negative. Black people shot each other in the city. Black people did this. It's constantly to the point of where they cross the street when a black man's approaching them down the street. The fear is that palpable and that real. And the average white American's perception of the average black man in America is so jaded and so informed from the wrong places and the wrong sources. And it's no different than the misinformation about the Jews or the Chinese in the camps here in America during the war, the Japanese. It's oppression against a group of people is wrong, no matter where it happens or why it happens. And there's always underlying dollar signs behind all of it. And I'm going to quote Jesus Christ here when I say, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Take that home with you. Mr. President, I hope your money's good to you. I hope you can spend that blood money somewhere, because from what I've heard, they ain't accepting that up there. Your cash is no good. Peace.